My guest on the podcast is someone I'm very familiar with and someone who has a lot in common with me and this podcast. Dr. Tracy Cushing is an emergency physician at the University of Colorado Health Science Center. She is a New Yorker by birth, a Coloradan by choice. She's a mom, she's a wife. She's a very active proponent of the vegan lifestyle. I'm sure we'll get into that at some point. And she has been a triathlete since 2016, having completed 4 Ironmans and 13 70.3s and a bunch of sprints in the intervening time. Unfortunately, in the last year, she's gone through a lot of personal turmoil, which we're going to get to when we chat very brief in a very short time here. But I want to continue to highlight some of the great things about her. The first of which is that she has a beautiful little daughter and has recently gotten remarried and is extremely happy in her current personal situation. But she's here today to talk about what's gone on for her in the last year, how triathlon has played a huge role in keeping her sane like the rest of us, and what is lying in store for her in the future. Tracy, welcome to the TriDoc Podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sankoff. It's great to be here.
So let's start first. I just want to talk about triathlon. So what got you to the sport in the first place?
A colleague that you know, Dr. Mike Breyer, was on his Ironman journey, and I was just chatting with him about it at work, and I remembered, I think I said out loud, 140 miles seems like a ridiculous thing to do. And it just seemed incredible. And I said, but I could probably do something a little shorter. And running was starting to take a toll on my body as I was getting older. And so I thought, well, biking and swimming would be a nice addition to running, and signed myself up. And I did the Boulder Peak in 2014. That was really my first triathlon, but it was kind of a mess. And I finished and I loved it and I got hooked, but I wouldn't say I was well prepared. I would say my first real try was in 2016.
It's really interesting. You know, when I talk to people who get into triathlon, there seems to be like 2 groups of people. There's the people who do it once and just are like, that was it, I'm satisfied, I'm done. And then there's people like you and me who do it the first time and just get absolutely hooked and just can't wait to do another one. And it really becomes a lifestyle and something they keep doing. And clearly for you, that has been the case. We have seen each other on the course many times, and you have always got the hugest smile. You are always enjoying yourself. And I love that about you when you are racing, because it doesn't matter how the day is going, you are always making the most of it. How do you like bring that to this sport? Because this sport is full of ups and downs, and yet you always seem to maintain that really sunny disposition and that great attitude.
I used to have really big problems being a bundle of nerves on race day. And for me, triathlon and the lifestyle was really about the training. And I really enjoyed the discipline and the regimen of training. And I really didn't like racing. And I really had to work hard on getting my mind frame switched such that I wasn't feeling stressed out, but came to view racing as basically a privilege and a joy. And if I wasn't enjoying it, then I shouldn't be out there doing it, because no one was forcing me to be there. And once I was able to kind of change my mind frame that way, and I'm competitive with myself. I try to beat my own times, but I'm not really competitive with other people out there. And I'm just there really to have fun and just to be healthy, and just to know that I can finish the distance is really enough. I mean, I definitely try to improve all the time, but I'm satisfied actually just being out there and trying to have fun.
It's a great attitude. And I like I said, I love that about you. And it's something that you really need to teach everybody else because so many people, I was the same. I used to come home after races and be almost angry at my performance. And my wife one day was like, why are you doing this if it's making you angry? And she was absolutely right. And, you know, as a very competitive person, I had to sort of sit myself down and be like, what am I doing? Like, you know, I love the training like you do. I love love the competitions unless I'm actually like putting in the kind of training where I can consider myself to be competitive in my age group. I have nothing to be angry about. And once I did that and kind of put perspective on the whole thing, like you, I think I always enjoy myself. And although recently at Boulder, you caught me at a bad moment, I still enjoyed the day. And once it was in perspective, I'm always happy. And it always makes me happy when I see people like you out there who are just loving every moment and always saying hi and always smiling. It's great. So I really appreciate you. And I wanted you to know that. Well, what was sort of like some of the seminal moments in your triathlon career? Because I know you've done a lot of races and I know you've had success, and it's been really interesting to watch you go from a newbie to really having some of those successes. So what are some of the highlights that, you think back on and are like some of the real kind of moments in your triathlon career, which is still ongoing, that you kind of look back on and think, wow, those were really big moments for me?
The first time I raced with my now husband was Timberman 70.3 in 2016, the last time it existed before this year. And so that was the first time I had ever packed my bike, traveled for a race, like had any idea that even existed. And we saw each other on the run course and we just embraced. And this group of spectators just burst into cheers. And it was just this incredible moment. And it was just so lovely and fun. That was a really high moment. I think another high moment was crossing the finish line with my husband at Ironman, Arizona. We caught up with each other on the run and we just ran together and we crossed the finish line together. That was a big deal. I crashed at Ironman Florida, my first full. I had a bike crash and I like tore off a bunch of my skin and I was pretty injured. And I had a real like moment with myself where I was like, you need to make a choice right now if you're going to get back on your bike and you're going to finish this thing. And I did. And I was really proud of myself for doing that. And I think Ironman Boulder in 2018 was probably the hardest day of my life. That those 100-degree temperatures, it just was so brutal. And the mental like energy, and my husband DNF'd. He quit after like 8 miles of the run. And he was like, I'll see you in town. I'm done. And knowing he wasn't going to be out there was so hard. And so I'm proud of myself for finishing that day because I really just didn't want to. I really just did not.
Yeah, that was a horrible day. But the thing is, again, I saw you out there on the course and you did not betray any of that because you looked like your typical self and you actually lifted me. So, thank you. All right. So all of that brings us to really a big reason why I wanted to have you here today. And that is what happened to you this past year. So why don't you tell us in your own words, the story of this past year?
Okay. So I would say, first off, working on the front lines of COVID was pretty rewarding, actually. I had a good year and I felt really good in 2020 and kind of enjoyed not commuting for other things and was actually having a pretty good year despite the world sort of imploding. And then kind of in November of 2020, I sort of felt a lump in my breast and the doctor and me like got a little nauseous and was like, ooh, that's not right. But the patient in me said, oh, I'm sure it's nothing. I'll just wait a couple months and I'm sure it'll go away and it'll be fine. And I've had normal mammograms every year since I was 40. So I'm sure it's fine. And then in January, I did a really hard workout and then I got in the sauna and I laid down and I could see like dimpling in my breast area where the lump was. And I knew that it was bad. So I got myself in for an ultrasound and a biopsy. And at the end of January, was diagnosed with invasive lobular breast cancer, which is the rarer of the breast cancer kinds. And it was a 3.4 centimeter tumor, which is pretty big in a lady who had pretty small boobs. And then from January onward, it's just been a whirlwind of diagnoses, treatment options, surgeries. and the whole nine. I opted for a double mastectomy, which I had in March with no reconstruction. And that's a whole other story. And then I opted for surgical menopause in April because I didn't want to take drugs to put me into menopause. I'm 45 and I was knocking on the door anyway. And I figured it may as well be really, really sure that I have no more estrogen left since my tumor was estrogen positive. And so went into menopause mid-April, gave up my plans for Ironman Coeur d'Alene shortly thereafter. And
which was another 100+ degree day. So maybe, not a bad thing.
I don't feel terrible about missing that one. That's for sure. And so now I take a drug called letrozole that I'll be on for 7 to 10 years to hopefully prevent my cancer from coming back.
So let's just back up just a little bit for some of the listeners who probably aren't going to be savvy with a lot of the stuff you just said. So breast cancer, the most common types of breast cancer are either adeno or ductal. And those are the ones that most people are familiar with. They tend to be fairly aggressive, but are pretty treatable these days. And then you mentioned the genes. The BRCA gene is something that a lot of people will have heard of. That's a familial one. And when there's a BRCA positive, it means that it's very aggressive and will often appear in other organs and therefore mandates removal of the ovaries as well as the other breast. Now, you had a cancer that, as you said already, was a fairly rare one, which is lobular breast cancer. I'm not an oncologist myself, and so I don't even know much about that one. So could you tell us a little bit in terms of lobular breast cancer, in terms of its prognosis globally, not your prognosis, but just global prognosis, and then also the standard treatments? Is it standard to have removal of the ovaries, et cetera?
Sure. So their basic anatomy of the breast, you have ducts that carry milk to the nipple when you have a baby, and the milk is formed in lobules. And so the types of cells that make milk can lead to lobular breast cancer, just like the ductal, as you mentioned, comes from the ductal cells. So typically lobular is associated with pregnancy. I personally went through a change where I went from I was a B cup before pregnancy. I was almost an E cup during pregnancy. So my breasts underwent incredible hormonal changes during pregnancy, which probably contributed to my developing lobular breast cancer. And that type, unfortunately, as I mentioned, I had normal mammograms every year since the age of 40 because it doesn't tend to calcify, which are the things that you can see on a mammogram that are abnormal. And so it doesn't show up on a mammogram. And so despite doing all the good screening, I was lucky enough that my breasts were small enough that I could feel the lump myself because it was completely undetectable on a routine mammogram. And because of that, unfortunately, lobular cancers tend to present later because they're missed on screening mammograms. So I was lucky to have found mine when it appears not to have spread outside of my breast, which is great. The crappy thing about lobular is that it tends to recur later than ductal. So my window of surveillance and anxiety is 15 years instead of 10. And it does tend to come back in the other breast as well, which ductal doesn't seem to do. So for me, I had a big tumor in a small breast. I had a chance of it coming back on the other side. And one thing my medical oncologist said that really struck with me was she said the women that she sees that are most unhappy with their outcomes, it's because of asymmetry. So if you have only one breast, it's really hard to dress for that. If you have one native breast and one reconstructed breast, they can't really possibly ever look alike because a natural breast is going to sag over time and a fake one won't. And so I just said, look, I'm good. I'm at peace with it. Take them both. And that was my choice.
Can I ask, since you've had the double mastectomy, is the surveillance for recurrence elsewhere in the body, or is it because there may still be some residual tissue?
It's for elsewhere in the body.
Okay.
So I no longer get mammograms. I don't get MRIs of my chest or anything. I just get basically exams of my chest wall for recurrence and then CAT scans of everything else to look for spread.
Right. And I mentioned earlier that Dr. Cushing and I, Tracy and I, have a lot in common. And this is the other thing we have in common. We both have a personal attachment and history with cancer. Mine with my daughter, Lauren, and obviously Tracy, much more personal in that it's within herself. Just continuing with what you were telling us, the need to remove the ovaries, was that just because your tumor was estrogen positive and you didn't want to take drugs? That's not because there's a risk of ovarian cancer.
Correct. So I had my genetics studied as well. I have no BRCA mutation. I had none of the mutations associated with breast cancer, and I have no family history. So I had pretty much no risk factors for breast cancer, and we can just call it really bad luck. But because lobular tumors are associated with usually hormones, mine was almost 100% estrogen positive, meaning that my tumor cells loved estrogen, and that makes them grow. And so in order to prevent rogue cells that have spread from turning into tumors, you have to block estrogen production. And my choices were take drugs to suppress my ovaries from making estrogen, or just get them taken out and be sure that I wasn't making any more estrogen. And the drugs don't suppress it 100%. And for younger women than myself who might want to have children after treatment, that's certainly a really good option. But for me, I was done having kids. I was, again, as I said, close to menopause anyway. And it was the most surefire way to be done with producing estrogen. So
now, you've been very public about how training and triathlon really helped you in terms of your mental state in going through this treatment. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I would say starting from the day of my diagnosis, I immediately got back in the pool and I started swimming, and I spent the 6 weeks that I had before my mastectomy building my upper body strength and my core strength like I had never done before, because I knew going into that surgery, I was going to need that. And that it would help my recovery afterwards if I was in shape beforehand. So I really focused on my shoulders and my upper body and my range of motion and all the things that I knew would be affected by the mastectomy. And then I got a really crappy used treadmill from somebody in Boulder. And the day after my mastectomy, I walked a mile. And the day after that, I walked 1.5 miles. And the day after that, I walked 2 miles. And every single day I walked, no matter what, no matter how crappy I felt, no matter what. And 5 weeks later, I ran a 5K. And I just never stopped moving. And I think even though in my mind, at that time, I was devastated. I didn't think I'd race at all this year. I didn't know what was on the table. I wasn't sure if I'd need chemo at that point. I just kept my body moving every single day. And it really made, I think, a huge difference. And I never took pain medicine. I was back in the pool as soon as my drains came out after surgery. And I bounced back really quickly. The menopause piece has been a little bit harder to bounce back from, because that's not a surgery to bounce back from. That's a new life phase or cycle, if you will, and that's a different ballgame. But triathlon really just sent me on this journey from a healthy place and helped me recover back to where I am now. And my 70.3 in Boulder was 2 minutes within my PR of my last Boulder 70.3. So I'm pretty much back to where I was.
That's amazing. I want to get to both of those things in a second, the menopause and your Boulder race, but just this idea that triathlon sets you up for a healthy recovery and really, almost imbued you with this mindset. I almost wonder if it's a two-way street though, because you've succeeded in triathlon because you had the right mindset. And so because of that, it's been a really good complementary kind of, back and forth. But I think that's a really important point. I've talked on this podcast before about, mental preparation and mental attitude towards training and racing, and how a lot of that translates really nicely to the things that we encounter in life. And I think you've just expressed that really, really nicely. And it's a great illustration of how the things that we do in training and racing really can translate to our personal life when we face those kinds of challenges. So, kudos to you for that. This idea of something I've been wanting to cover for a very long time, and I continue to try and find the right person to talk to about it, is this notion of the difficulties for the perimenopausal and postmenopausal athlete. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you went through it like most women go through it over a period of, maybe 6 months to a year. You went, no, today to tomorrow. So tell us what that's been like.
I mean, I think the abrupt onset at least I knew it was coming, and I knew exactly what it was. I think for a lot of women, there's this kind of vague multi-year period where they just don't quite feel right. Their training isn't going as well. They're not building muscle as easily as they had before. And they don't necessarily ping it towards, oh, here comes menopause. So for me, at least I knew, hey, here it is. And I had my first really bad hot flash probably like 2 days after getting my ovaries out. And that's been, night sweats and hot flashes have been pretty terrible. And I'm definitely a little more fatigued after workouts than I was before, and I could use a little more sleep, but it's disrupting my sleep. And so that cycle has been a little hard to deal with, not to mention being a night shift worker on top of that. And so for me, the difficulty has been sleep.
Is your ability to actually sustain the workouts, especially the intense ones, has that been affected by that?
Apparently not. Like my FTP went up by about 10 watts in the last 6 months. And I can, as long as I'm well rested and focused on that, I can get through the workouts. So
it's a sleep issue more than anything else.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do notice that my body seems a little bit softer than it did before. Apparently sarcopenia or muscle wasting is not uncommon after menopause, and it's harder to keep muscle on. And so I've had to focus a little more on lifting weights, which I didn't used to really care about or do much of. And I need to do that a little more and a little less aerobic. And for me as well, and for all women, osteoporosis is a big fear and a big risk. Estrogen is preventative against that. And so once you stop that, you're at a high risk for osteoporosis and fractures. And I'm petrified I'm going to fall off my bike and break into a million pieces. So I'm trying to be very diligent about calcium and vitamin D. And I'm also getting infusions every 6 months of a bisphosphonate drug to protect my bones. So you've dispelled a couple of things that I think a lot of athletes keep in the back of their mind, which is, if I'm sick, I can't stop training, or I can't take time off training because I'm going to lose so much. I'm never going to get back to where I was, especially older athletes. And yet here you are going through chemotherapy, surgery, all of these things, being off for a prolonged period of time, and yet able to bounce back. And as you said, perform in Boulder almost as well as your PR. So what do you say to athletes who say, I can't take a rest day, or, I can't take any time off when I'm sick? I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, I will say I understand that, because like I said, I didn't really take a day off. I jumped on that treadmill the day after surgery and I started walking. It just looked different. I stayed active every day. It just had to look a little bit different than it was before. And I just had to be okay with that, and recognizing that for a few weeks or months, things weren't going to quite look the same. The first pool workout I had after my mastectomy, I cried. It was so humbling. It was like I had never swam before. I was like flopping around. I didn't know where my arms or my body was in the pool. And it felt terrible. And I cried because I thought, oh my gosh, all my hard work, it's gone. And And that was in March or April by then. And now it's August and I'm really back to where I was. So I think as we get older and as we undergo things like sickness or illness or other things, your body needs time to recharge. You will lose fitness and hurt yourself if you overtrain, undereat, and undersleep. And so you just have to be sensitive to those things, particularly as we age and sleep and food become more important than a really hard workout sometimes.
Excellent. I couldn't actually, I have said it pretty much like that, but you said it probably significantly better than I ever have. So good for you. Tracy, something I wanted to ask you about was because I look at what you're doing. I look at what Lauren's doing, coming back from her cancer similarly and doing like just great things. And, part of me wants to say it's really inspirational, but at the same time, I have had athletes who are physically challenged. Laurel Graham, Liz McTiernan have both been on this podcast before, and I've spoken to them about this, and they both told me that they really find being inspirational to be somewhat abhorrent to them. They don't like that because as far as physically challenged athletes go, they feel that they're doing exactly what, able-bodied athletes are doing, and they shouldn't be considered an inspiration because they're doing the same thing as everybody else is. I'm curious, as a cancer survivor, are you okay with this concept that what you're doing is inspirational, or would you rather it just be, no, this is just me doing me, and not everybody should aspire, because not everybody's going to be able to do the same. How do you sort of process that?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I have really tried to embrace being inspirational, and whether it's triathlon, whether it's hiking a long trail, whether it's biking across America, whatever keeps you going every day to get back to where you were should be the goal for every athlete, but especially someone who's had a setback, whether it's a physical or other type of illness. And I think that to show other people that you can get back to where you were before, whatever your baseline was, and that they can do it too, is really inspirational, especially something like breast cancer that just takes so much, right? I didn't just lose my breasts. I lost my ovaries. I lost my middle age. I lost my estrogen. I lost a lot of things. And I think the fact that I kept doing what I love was inspirational to me even. Like, I felt great that I could do those things. And so I want other, especially cancer survivors out there to know that they can be back to doing whatever their inspiration is as well. And I've met some incredible survivors out there too, which is really cool to see. And so that's awesome. That's been neat.
Well, you're an inspiration to me. That's for sure. I like I said, can't say it enough. Love seeing you out there, and I look forward to seeing you again. What's next for you?
I'm relaying the Harvest Moon up here on September 11th. And then I'm racing Worlds in St. George.
Oh, great. So I'll see you out there. That's exciting. Yes. Well, they condensed it to one day, so we'll be out there together. Great.
And then I have Cozumel 6 days later, the 70.3. So this will be exciting. I've never done back-to-back 70.3s. So it'll be interesting. St. George is just going to be strictly for fun and for the experience, and then hopefully Cozumel will be a more intense.
I don't want to dash your enthusiasm, but that run course, not really fun. But everything else about the day is going to be pretty fun. So
you know what? I'm okay walking. Like, I'm really okay with that. I have come to a zen place with triathlon where, like, it's about the experience. I'm going to enjoy those red rocks, and
it is beautiful. Honestly, it's a magnificent course. You're going to love it. It's really nice out there. Now, since you've been back, I've seen you on the podium several times. So let's hear it. I want to hear what you've done because, not at the 70.3 level, but at some local races here, you've done very well. So let me hear what you've done, Miss Cancer Survivor, just back from chemotherapy and then surgery.
I took second place in my age group at the Sunrise Sprint,
which is a big race.
Which is a big race. I think I also took second at the Colorado Tri Sprint. And I took second at Outdoor Divas and at Tri Boulder in the sprint. So I seem to like second place on the podium.
Excellent. Well, I love hearing all of that. I love hearing your story and love hearing that you are well. And we will continue to follow your story. I have Tracy's links to her Instagram where you can see all what she's doing to crush cancer, and that will be in the show notes. Tracy Cushing, thank you so much for joining me on the TriDoc Podcast for this really entertaining conversation and very personal. I really appreciate you sharing all of this.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for taking an interest. I know you have a personal interest in this subject, unfortunately, but it's really good to be here. I appreciate it.